Chapter 1 SCIENTIFICSOCIALISM Capitalism and Socialism. The idea of socialism arose and gripped men's minds in modern society because of discontent with the evils of capitalism, and the perception that only by a radical transformation of the entire economic basis of society could these evils be done away with. In capitalist society, the means of production, the land, factories, mills, mines, transport, belong to the capitalists, and production is carried on for capitalist profit. But the essence of socialism is that the means of production become social property, and that, on the basis of social ownership, production is carried on for the benefit of the whole of society. From its very beginning, capitalism meant a previously undreamed of increase in the powers of producing wealth. But this wealth went to swell the profits of a few, while the mass of the working people were condemned to toil and poverty. To use the new powers of producing wealth, not to enrich a few, but to enrich the whole of society, is the aim of socialism. Great new productive forces have been created in modern society as witness the discoveries of science and the growth of industry. But it becomes ever more evident that the capitalist owners and managers cannot direct the development and use of these forces for the benefit of the majority of the people. Today the means exist, in modern technique and science, to feed and clothe the whole world, to provide education, culture, opportunity for everyone, to provide all with a high standard of living. If all the discoveries at our disposal were used, and if supplies were directed where they are most needed, this could undoubtedly be done. Nuclear energy can provide almost unlimited power, automation can lighten labor and turn out goods in profusion, medical science can relieve or stamp out diseases, the biological and agricultural sciences can ensure enough food for a bigger population than the world at present supports. Instead, resources both human and technical remain unemployed. For if all this were done, where would be the profit for the great capitalist monopolies? Meantime, while people still suffer and die from shortages, vast resources are squandered on weapons of destruction. People have even come to fear new knowledge and higher techniques, because they fear that the result of higher techniques may only be crisis and unemployment, and that the result of more knowledge may only be the invention of even more fearful weapons of destruction. The profit system has converted men's highest achievements into threats to their livelihood and very existence. This is the final sign that that system has outlived its time and must be replaced by another. Socialism means that the vast resources of modern technique are developed and used to meet the needs of the people. Production is not carried on for profit, but to satisfy the material and cultural requirements of society. And this is ensured because the means of production, all the means of creating wealth, are taken out of the control of a capitalist minority, whose concern is its own profit, and come under the control of the working people themselves. Socialist theory and the working class movement. But in order to achieve socialism, we need something more than a general idea of socialism as a better order of society than capitalism. We need to understand what social forces must be organized and what opponents they will have to defeat. The first conceptions of socialism were utopian. The first socialists had the vision of a better order of society, gave it form and color, and proclaimed it far and wide. But it remained merely a vision. They could not say how to realize it in practice. 8. The utopians criticized the capitalist order of society as unreasonable and unjust. For them, socialism was based simply on reason and justice, and because they considered that the light of reason belonged equally to all men, they appealed to everyone, and first of all to the rulers of society, as being the best educated and most influential, to embrace the truth of socialism and put it into practice. They contributed the first exposure and condemnation of capitalism, and the first vision of socialism, a society based on common ownership of the means of production, as the alternative to capitalism. But this vision was spun out of the heads of reformers. The utopians could not show the way to achieve socialism, because they had no conception of the laws of social change and could not point to the real social force capable of creating a new society. That force is the working class. The capitalist class is bound to resist socialism, because the end of the profit system means the end of the capitalist class. For the working class, on the other hand, socialism means its emancipation from exploitation. Socialism means the end of poverty and insecurity. It means that workers work for themselves and not for the profit of others. The achievement of socialism depends on the mobilization of the working class in the fight for socialism, and on its overpowering the resistance of the capitalist class. And in this struggle the working class must seek to unite with itself all those sections, and together they constitute the majority of society, who in one way or another are fleeced by the greed for profits of the ruling capitalist minority. But more than that. If socialism is to be won, if working class emancipation from capitalism is to be achieved, then the working class movement must become conscious of its socialist aim. But this consciousness does not spontaneously arise of itself. It requires the scientific working out of socialist theory, the introduction of this theory into the working class movement, and the fight for it inside that movement. The very conditions of life of the workers lead them to combine to defend their standards of life from capitalist attack, and to improve them. But the trade union struggle to defend and improve working class standards does not get rid of capitalism. On the contrary, so long as working class struggle is limited to such purely economic aims, its utmost stretch is to gain concessions from capitalism while continuing to accept the existence of the system. And the movement can pass beyond this phase of fighting for no more than reforms within capitalism only when it equips itself with socialist theory. Only then can it become conscious of its long-term aim of getting rid of capitalism altogether, and work out the strategy and tactics of the class struggle for achieving this aim. In the history of the working class movement there have been many leaders concerned with nothing beyond winning concessions from capitalism. They have in effect sought merely temporary gains for different sections of the working class at the expense of the long-term interests of the whole class. This is known as opportunism. And the root of opportunism in the working class movement consists in accepting the spontaneous struggle for concessions and reforms as the be-all and end-all of the movement. If socialism is to be achieved, the working class movement must not rely only on the spontaneous development of the mass struggle for better conditions. It must equip itself with socialist theory, with the scientific understanding of capitalism and of the position of the different classes under capitalism, with the scientific understanding that emancipation can be achieved only by uniting all forces for the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of socialism. Without the guiding and organizing force of scientific socialist theory, the working class cannot win victory over capitalism. The union of socialist theory with the mass working class movement is a condition for the advance from capitalism to socialism. The Marxist science of society. The great contribution of Marxism was to develop scientific socialist theory and to introduce it into the working class movement. Marx and Engels based socialism on a scientific understanding of the laws of development of society and of the class struggle. And so they were able to show how socialism could be won, and to arm the working class with knowledge of its historical mission. Marx did not arrive at his conclusions as a pure research worker, though he did conduct profound research. In the I-84Os, Marx was engaged as a revolutionary Republican and Democrat in the movement which led up to the revolutionary year 1848. And he arrived at his conclusions as an active politician, striving to understand the movement in which he participated in order to help guide it to the goal of the people's emancipation from oppression, superstition and exploitation. These conclusions were formulated in the manifesto of the Communist Party which Marx wrote, in collaboration with Engels, in 1848. They saw the whole social movement as a struggle between classes. They saw the contending classes themselves as products of the economic development of society. They saw politics as the reflection of the economic movement and of the class struggle. They saw that the bourgeois revolution then in progress, the task of which was to remove the vestiges of feudal rule and establish democracy, was preparing the way for the proletarian, socialist revolution, and they saw that this revolution could only be consummated by the working class conquering political power. It was only because they espoused the cause of the working class and saw in it the new, rising, revolutionizing force in history, that Marx and Engels were able to discover the laws of social change, which those who adopted the standpoint of the exploiting classes could never do. Certain historical facts occurred which led to a decisive change in the conception of history, wrote Engels in Socialist Circumflex Utopian and Scientific. In 1831 the first working class rising had taken place at Lyons. Between 1838 and 1848 the first national workers' movement, that of the English Chartists, reached its height. The class struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie came to the front. But the old idealist conception of history knew nothing of class struggle based on material interests, in fact knew nothing at all of material interests. The new facts made imperative a new examination of all past history. From this new situation, Engels continued, it became clear that all past history was the history of class struggles, that these warring classes are always the product of conditions of production and exchange, in a word, of the economic conditions of their time, that therefore the economic structure of society always forms the real basis from which, in the last analysis, is always to be explained the whole superstructure of legal and political institutions, as well as of the religious, philosophical and other conceptions of each historical period. From the recognition of the significance of the class struggle in capitalist society came the realization that the class struggle was likewise waged in previous epochs and that, in fact, the whole of past history since the break-up of the primitive communes was the history of class struggles. But on what was the class struggle based? On the clash of the material interests of the different classes. Realizing this, the key to historical development as a whole had to be sought in the sphere of these material interests. The different classes with their different interests were seen to be the product of the conditions of production and exchange, of the economic conditions prevailing in society. Marx, in Wage Labor and Capital, pointed out that in production men not only act on nature, but also on one another. They produce only by cooperating in a certain way and mutually exchanging their activities. In order to produce, they enter into definite connections and relations with one another, and only within these social connections and relations does their action on nature, does production, take place. Marx and Engels discovered the key to understanding the whole development of society in the investigation of these production relations, that is, the economic conditions of production and exchange, and of the struggle between classes produced by these economic conditions. Thus understanding the laws of historical development, 12 Marx and Engels showed that socialism was not a utopian dream, but the necessary outcome of the development of capitalist society and of the working class struggle against capitalism. They taught the working class to be conscious of its own strength and of its own class interests, and to unite for a determined struggle against the capitalist class, rallying around itself all the forces discontented with capitalism. They showed that it was impossible to get rid of capitalism and establish socialism unless the working class won political power, deprived the capitalist class of all power, and stamped out its resistance. And they showed that in order to emerge from the old world and create a new, classless society, the working class must have its own party, which they called the Communist Party. Chapter 2 Matt.